Congratulations on the Fiore International AI Scholarship. Could you tell us a little bit about the current research work that you're pursuing and what are some of the most interesting aspects for you as a researcher?
If you are certain that you want a career in research, then there are two things you need to keep in mind. If you really want to study ahead, if you want to get a master's or even a PhD at some point, the first one is you need to have a good enough GPA.
Your track record includes multiple global internships. Could you tell us a little bit about how you uncovered these opportunities and, more importantly, how did you mold your profile in such a way that you're one of the competitive applicants at any of these internships?
The research process, there is a fixed procedure that you need to follow when you are conducting research. And that is, like you said, you look through a lot of literature, you read a lot of articles, and based on those articles, you kind of try to find a gap in literature. You kind of try to find what is missing in existing literature and you try to build up on it.
In a world where AI tools are ubiquitous, how do you bridge the gap between conducting medical AI research and then building an actual viable product out of it?
There are lots of technologies that you can experiment with in your undergrad. So I, like everybody else, started doing competitive programming. I did not find it to be very interesting.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of IEEE Pune's podcast Beyond Conversations. In today's episode, we are joined by Sania Sinha, an inspiring AI researcher and innovator who's using artificial intelligence to tackle real world socially impactful problems. Sania is currently pursuing a master's research in medical robotics and image guided intervention at Imperial College London, where her work blends cutting edge AI with clinical impact. Her interests span health AI, computer vision, and image or video processing, and she's especially passionate about building end to end AI pipelines that work in high pressure, fast moving startup environments. She's previously worked with world renowned institutions such as Carnegie Mellon University, UT Austin, India, University of Warwick, IIT BHU, and NIT Patna, a journey that has helped shape her strong research foundation. Sania has also contributed more than 7 research papers published in prominent journals. Outside the lab, she's a talented technical writer whose freelance work has gained over 1 million impressions communicating complex ideas in clear, accessible ways. In this episode, we dive into Sania's journey through the world of AI research, her pivot into healthcare, the challenges and rewards of interdisciplinary work, and her vision for using AI to drive social good. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of IEEE Pune's podcast Beyond Conversations. On our show today, we have a medical AI researcher, Sania Sinha. It's great to have you on our show today. Sania, my first question to you will be about the origin story. What first sparked your interest in engineering? How did you then go on to become an AI researcher? And how did the maneuver happen specifically towards medical AI research?
Thank you for your questions. So, I had always been passionate about the sciences and I always wanted to develop a product of my own. And for that, I was particularly drawn towards the engineering field. I did my undergrad in electronics and communications engineering because that gave me a lot of time to actually focus and try out different technologies, whether I was interested on in more of the software side or in more of the hardware side. So, I kind of had, the best of both worlds when I was doing my undergrad. So from that, I come from a family of academics. My grandparents were academics, my parents were academics. So I was kind of propelled into the direction of research. Um, so on the basis of that, I undertook a research internship at the National Institute of Technology in Patna. I'm from Patna, so it was kind of hard for me to commute every day. And yeah, the people there were working on medical AI, and I found that to be really interesting and insightful. So that's when I decided to actually proceed with this branch. Sure. So like you said, there are lots of technologies that you can experiment with in your undergrad. So I, like everybody else, started doing competitive programming. I did not find it to be very interesting, to be very honest. I tried out different technologies, tried out web development, app development, cloud technologies, cloud advocacy, and I finally landed on machine learning and artificial intelligence. and I found out that I was kind of good at it, and I really enjoyed the field. That's when, I started to uh, look for more research opportunities, starting from the one based at NIT Patna. After that, I progressed to IIT BHU. From IIT BHU, it was Carnegie Mellon University, where I did a stint for 3 months. Uh, and after that, there was UT Austin. I think I'm kind of messing up the dates in my mind. Maybe UT Austin came TMU. It's hard to keep track of all of it. It happened so long ago. Uh, After that, I did a stint at the University of Warwick, which was my first paid internship. So before that, everything else was unpaid. I think that's all right. That I think that's also a great lesson to learn, that when you're learning, when you're in your second year, up until your second year, you should not be really expecting remuneration from research because they're not going to pay you. They're as is underpaid, right? So they're not going to give you any kind of support or stipend at this point. But since you're there to learn, I think it's a great starting point. You don't really have to look for a payment opportunity at that point. Um, After that, when I went to Warwick, it was my first paid international, like on-site paid international internship, which was quite exciting. And after Warwick, I did a 6 month stay at Indria in Province, which is in France. And after that, I came to Imperial College London for my master's degree. So yeah, there have been a lot of changes throughout, but I think all of those have changed me and molded me into the person I am now. So everything pays off for the better.
Your track record includes multiple global internships. Could you tell us a little bit about how you uncovered these opportunities? And more importantly, how did you mold your profile in such a way that you're one of the competitive applicants at any of these internships?
So if you are certain that you want a career in research, then there are two things you need to keep in mind. If you really want to study ahead, if you want to get a master's or even a PhD at some point, the first one is you need to have a good enough GPA. I can't stress on this enough. If you have a GPA less than 8, it kind of sets a negative impact. It kind of sets a negative impression on the admissions committee, on the supervisor as well. So from my campus, my rank was 1 throughout my undergrad. So I kind of had a stepping an edge when it came to all of that. And secondly, it's really important that you publish your research in good reputed journals or conferences. Both of them have their own sets of advantages and disadvantages, but whatever journal or conference your supervisor recommends you should be the one you should be submitting to. So these are the two main steps you should take in mind before you apply for any research internship. And in order to find internships that suit you, I think for my summer internship in which I landed up at Warwick, I applied to like 7 or 8 of such internship programs, of which I was accepted into I think around two. So the trick for that is be chronically online, apply to as many roles as possible, and then you'll finally get selected to at least one or two of them. So if you apply to a large number of programs, it automatically boosts your chances of selections. Simple probabilistic mathematics. And yeah, I think that's kind of all. Yeah.
Congratulations on the Fiore International AI Scholarship. Could you tell us a little bit about the current research work that you're pursuing and what are some of the most interesting aspects for you as a researcher?
So I haven't joined Warwick as of now. My program starts in October. I'm currently working on research at Imperial College London in the field of medical imaging. So we're trying to develop a non-invasive diagnosis solution wherein we are trying to map oxygenation and perfusion in the human body. So oxygenation and perfusion can indicate several can be biomarkers for several anomalies. For example, if there is a transplant, after the transplant, if there is reduced oxygenation in the body, that would indicate that the transplant has failed or the body has rejected the oxygen. So, for such reasons, oxygenation and mapping is of critical importance. And till this date, oxygenation mapping is performed, invasively. You can't perform it through just pulse oximeters, which can only measure oxygenation at the body tips. So for that, we are trying to develop a hyperspectral camera system, a hyperspectral laparoscopy system that can detect oxygenation changes or perfusion in the human body non-invasively.
As a student AI researcher, could you tell us a little bit more about your process of conducting research and what are some of the guiding principles that you always follow in order to ensure that your work is not something that just produces results in the labs but is also meaningful in real world clinician settings?
So, the research process, there is a fixed procedure that you need to follow when you are conducting research. And that is, like you said, you look through a lot of literature, you read a lot of articles, and based on those articles, you kind of try to find a gap in literature. You kind of try to find what is missing in existing literature, and you try to build up on it. So, the research process. So you can't. What really has helped me the most in my throughout the evolution of my research is the way that I read literature. So in the beginning, you would try to read all the paper in one go, right? You would try to understand whatever is happening, even though it's kind of difficult for you to understand because you're an undergrad student, right? You can't be expected to know everything that's happening in the research paper, and that's all right. So the main the key discovery that I made about learning research papers is that you read the abstract, you read the conclusion, and slowly you try to ease yourself into the methodology. If you don't understand something, look it up. Don't let it be. Don't think, okay, I can do this any other time. Just look it up instantly, and then you'll find a lot more confident in your research itself. So it's very important that you first of all get a brief idea of what the paper is about, read the abstract, read the conclusion, and after that, ease yourself into the methodology. That's what I do now. So there is a lot of tweaking that takes place. Like you are tweaking your end goal throughout the project, right? Because you might think that something is possible, but as the project progresses, you realize it's not really possible. So there is a lot of tweaking going on throughout the modeling phase. I think the most important part of modeling is knowing how to process your data. There are going to be lots of data samples available. However, in terms of medical AI, there is the main problem with medical AI is that there is a dearth of annotated medical data. So you need to find ways to develop models that can suit the amount of data that you have. I think that's one of the key challenges in the medical AI domain right now. And for that, there are self-supervised learning technologies that people are working on. And there is a lot of work being done. If you look at any recent MyKai paper, you would find out that people are working so much towards solving this problem of annotation dearth. Uh, so there is and there is no de facto method that has been established yet to solve this problem. So, like people are constantly working towards a simple set problem statement. That's what people are doing right now. They're trying to solve the same problem in multiple different ways. So I think if you're starting with medical AI in particular, this is one area where you should definitely try to work. If you're trying to develop a model, it's best to implement previous research papers that have already been published. You can look at their GitHub, you can look at at the code that they have published and try to replicate it for yourself. Usually, papers that are published in high-end conferences or journals have a GitHub repository so that you can reproduce their code. So that's a good enough starting point. And you try to make changes in their code, not on their GitHub, of course, but privately in order to see how you could modify them. And then you try to look for different alternatives to what they have done in order to get, better results, maybe. So that's basically the entire AI modeling pipeline that I follow, and a lot of other researchers I have come in contact with follow. So, well,
In a world where AI tools are ubiquitous, how do you bridge the gap between conducting medical AI research and then building an actual viable product out of it?
cool. So, to answer your question, you can't really build a clinically viable product unless you have performed your share of medical research AI research on it, and it is deemed well enough to go through your clearance procedure. So, in order to develop a product that can be used in clinical practices or that can be translated from the bench to the bedside, you need to take several considerations into mind. The key one of them being that your product actually works and does not cause any harm in the diagnosis or in the prognosis pipeline. So you need to develop a product that actually solves the problem at hand, as well as something that does not interfere with current protocols. That is one key step that needs to be taken into consideration. Apart from that, your research needs to be solid. There should be no scope for tweaks, adjustments, improvements in the model towards the beta end of production, because you are creating a product that is going to impact lives, and it won't really receive clearance from the authorities unless your product has been tested in every possible scenario. So, there are lots of considerations that are required to be kept in mind when you are putting a product up into production. And I think that medical research in general, that is done on a bench, that is done in a laboratory, is very different from a product that needs to be deployed. So, for that, probably an industrial person would be able to answer it in much more detail, who has actually worked in translating products. I haven't done something like that so far. I'm currently working in association with a startup that is doing something like that, but we have not published something so far. So yeah, we don't have we don't have any products right now to show for that.
So, your work in medical robotics at Imperial College is something that's specifically intriguing. Can you tell us about your work at Imperial and also about what are some of the most promising technologies that you have observed in medical AI research, or some projects that you think are extremely promising and we might get to see on ground in the next 1 or 2 decades?
So a lot of medical robotic technology is actually available in several hospitals across the world. For example, for phaco surgery, for knee replacement surgeries, there are lots of robotic systems that are already in place. And a lot of people ask me, are robots going to replace surgeons? And that is definitely not true. It will never happen as long as robots require surgical guidance to operate, because they do. All medical robots require surgical guidance to operate. They're not autonomous by any nature. Therefore, you will always require surgeons. That is something that needs to be said out loud. Nobody's getting replaced by a medical robot. Also, key developments in the so my master's degree is not just in medical robots. It's in medical robotics and image guided intervention. So I work on a lot of imaging based methods in order to obtain several in order to provide surgical guidance in general. So we are currently working on, like I said, using a non-invasive to create a non-invasive imaging system, wherein we use a hyperspectral camera. So a hyperspectral camera images over not just the visible region that you can see, but over the near infrared, the short infrared, the medium infrared region. So it gives you like a hypercube as an output. So a hypercube contains, so whenever you look at an image, it contains height, width, and some sort of color information, right?
Right.
So your color information is usually in the R, G, and B planes. So it has some R information, some G information, and some B information. But the information that you get from a hyperspectral camera, it's in the form of a cube. So you have height, width, and you have a number of spectral bands associated with it. So the camera that we are working on right now, the Living Optics, it has 96 spectral bands. So that's a really good camera. And we are trying to obtain and we're trying to leverage it as much as possible in order to get the highest amount of information content from it, to map oxygenation, to map perfusion, to find out the difference between two blood samples. So blood samples are gonna look alike, right? I mean, to the naked, both of them are gonna look red. But to the hyperspectral camera, you can actually see the spectral signatures wherein both the blood samples differ, wherein one contains a higher amount of hemoglobin because it has not been infected, wherein the other contains a lower amount of hemoglobin because it has been infected by a pathogen. So, in that case, a hyperspectral camera can differentiate between both samples based on the spectral signatures, which is not visible to the naked eye. And that is something that I'm working on and I'm really passionate about because it's so exciting. It opens so many doors to the future for non-invasive imaging, which is, I think, a great field to explore right now.
Could you tell us about your most meaningful AI research project till date?
So far, I have only done I guess, three individual projects of my own, wherein all the other projects were supervised by some institution in general. So it's important to be updated with the latest research that is being conducted. If you are into medical AI research, read papers by the IEEE transactions on medical imaging, the IEEE transactions on artificial intelligence. They provide you with up to date research on something that is actually being worked upon right now. And if you are into conferences, do read about MyKai. Do read conference papers by MyKai or by ISBI. These conferences provide up-to-date, cutting-edge information about the medical AI or the medical imaging research being held right now. If you're into robotics, do check out papers by ICRA, IROS. These are some conferences that must be kept in mind. Are the robotics automation letters? This is another journal that is used for robotics research. If you are into NLP, natural language processing, then check out EMNLP, ACL. These are the conferences. And if you are into, I guess, computer vision, check out NeurIPS or CVPR because they have cutting edge computer vision and neurological processing papers. So it's important to know what particular conference or what particular journal suits your research area the best. Read papers from them and then try to identify a problem statement. If you can, you will definitely find code for these conferences and journals available. So try to replicate them, try to run them on your system, try to find something that you can improve upon, maybe if you can. If not, then try to solve the same problem from scratch, use a pen and paper, write down everything, and then you can possibly find out a problem statement of your own. My most impactful project so far has been my work on enhancing low quality retinal images. So we worked on developing an unsupervised method to enhance image quality using fuzzy Siemens clustering and contrast adaptive histogram equalization, which is a very simple imaging method. Um, it's very lightweight, does not take up a lot of computational resources. And the best part about this project was that it received clinical validation across three doctors in Bihar and Jharkhand. And they kind of adopted that system and they used it in front of us. They helped us see where we could improve. So we received a lot of clinical validation on that project. And it was the IEEE transactions on artificial intelligence, which is one of the best journals for artificial intelligence research. Uh, so yeah, I think it has to be one of my most impactful projects, and I'm really excited about learning more or exploring more into that field, delving into that field later if I have a chance. So yeah.
Since you spoke about clinical validation, could you tell us about how important clinical validation is in medical AI research projects? What step would you actually bring a clinician in, and what kind of feedback does a medical AI researcher get from a clinician?
So it depends, because we were only working with hospitals based in the Bihar Jharkhand region. We spoke to them personally. We had some personal ties with some of the people in our lab had some personal ties with the doctors. So we kind of had to push an application through a medium. But on the basis of that, we didn't really take much time. If you just get behind the doctor's back, they'll ultimately have to, provide you with what you need. So yeah, it didn't take a lot of time. I think it took around 3 weeks, which is still a lot if you think about it. But yeah, it didn't take a lot of time as compared to other systems, as compared to the time other systems take, mostly because we had a medium. But apart from that, clinical validation could be in any form. So what we did in our paper was we asked three ophthalmologists to kind of provide clinical diagnosis on the images with and without the enhancement procedure. So a clinical validation for the ophthalmologists failed more in the images wherein the enhancement was not done than in images wherein the enhancement was done, thus supporting the claim that our enhancement method actually helps ophthalmologists take an informed decision. So it actually proved that. So that was all the validation that we needed, and after that we could publish. So yeah.
And you'd recommend having a clinician throughout the process right from the beginning. And also, I mean, does it work in such a way that you would also explain your methodology to them and get feedback on the methodology itself?
Yeah, definitely. So you need to lay it down in layman's terms, so because the clinician is not there for for a technical evaluation of your methodology, right? It
Mhm.
needs to be so you ask a clinician for a problem statement, but you can't come up with a problem statement of your own unless you know what a problem in the clinical world is. So you need a clinician to provide a problem statement. You think about how you can solve it, then you consult the clinician with the different ways this could be approached. And if the clinician says, all right, then you can move forward with it. And after that, you can have, weekly meetings with the clinical supervisor who can tell you that this is
Mhm.
another problem that we can look at. This is a tweak that we can make. Or if not, you can do your own share of literature review, try to find a system that is more clinically relevant in that case. And yeah, that's how you proceed.
Okay, coming to our last question. You're one of the recipients of the India Future Leaders Award. Uh, what does this award mean to you? How did you strengthen your profile to be one of the recipients of this award? And what is your vision as a future leader of India?
Uh, okay, it's not really not that flattering. But besides that, I think it really has to do with persistence. You need to be persistent, never give up. Don't let setbacks affect you from pursuing your dreams, from pursuing whatever you want. I have been very privileged to be backed by people who would send me to such a great institution of learning. And I could not be more grateful to my parents for their support. That's why I think that um, my parents have had a bigger share in my success than I have. um, I think it has been because of them. So I can't really take credit for this award at all. But yeah, to shape your career, just be consistent, be sure of what you want to do in life, and work towards it. Nothing can stop you, literally.
I think this is a really
That's all I
insightful
have to say.
podcast in terms of, yeah, in terms of information that you gave, the way you spoke about the journals the students should actually refer to if they're stepping into the AI research domain. I think that's very rare to see in many Indian engineering colleges. So I think this was a very, very impactful podcast that we were able to create. And thanks a lot for your time.